The map was folded 4 times, standard field practice. Whoever carried it last had pressed it flat against something hard, a journal cover, a rifle stock, a wooden crate, because the crease lines ran in perfect right angles, too precise for casual handling. It arrived at the Cartographic Review Division of the U.S. Interior Department in November of 1911 without a cover letter, without a sender's name, and without any reference number connecting it to an active survey. The receiving clerk logged it under the heading Miscellaneous Field Submissions, Unattributed. That log entry still exists. What happened to the map after that does not appear anywhere in the public record. But the map itself resurfaced, not in Washington, not in a federal archive, in a private estate sale in Billings, Montana in 1987, folded inside a leather satchel that had been sitting in a trunk for at least 40 years. The family who sold it had no idea what it was, neither at first did the man who bought it. His name was Raymond Colter. He was a retired land surveyor from Cody, Wyoming, with 31 years of field work behind him. He knew how to read a topographic map. He knew what survey notation looked like, what triangulation markers meant, what the difference was between a hand-rendered contour line and a printed one. And when he unfolded that map in his kitchen table in the spring of 1988, he told his wife, in what she would later describe as a very quiet voice, that something was wrong with it. Not wrong in the sense of inaccurate, wrong in the sense of impossible. The map depicted a section of the Upper Powder River Basin in northeastern Wyoming, roughly 340 square miles of high-elevation terrain that had been formally surveyed twice before, once in 1874 as part of the General Land Office's systematic township grid expansion, once again in 1993 during a boundary correction sweep following a contested land grant in Johnson County. Both of those surveys are in the public record, their field notes, their plat maps, their correction certificates, all of it cataloged under Record Group 49 at the National Archives, accessible, indexed, and cross-referenced. Raymond Colter had worked with maps from that region for decades. He knew the terrain. He knew what the 1874 and 1893 surveys had produced. And what he was holding on his kitchen table matched neither of them in one very specific, very disturbing way. In the upper left quadrant of the map, at a coordinate position he calculated as approximately 44 degrees 17 minutes north, 106 degrees 52 minutes west, there was a structure drawn. Not a natural feature, not a ridge line, not a canyon wall, not a river bend, a structure, rendered with deliberate, measured lines, rectangular in its outer boundary, approximately 190 feet across its longer axis, based on the scale notation printed in the map's lower margin. And inside the outer boundary, smaller internal divisions, walls or chambers or corridors, drawn with the same careful hand that had rendered every contour line and every drainage channel on the rest of the map. The 1874 survey showed nothing there. The 1893 survey showed nothing there. The modern USGS quadrangle for that section shows nothing there. Raymond Colter drove to that location in the summer of 1988 and found a flat, unremarkable plateau covered in sagebrush and dry grass. But the map showed a structure, and whoever drew that map had been there. Colter spent 3 years trying to identify the map's origin. He wrote letters, physical letters, this being 1988, to the National Archives, to the Wyoming State Historic Preservation Office, to the Smithsonian Institution's Division of Anthropology, and to the U.S. Geological Survey's Historical Records Unit in Reston, Virginia. The responses he received were polite, brief, and consistently unhelpful. The National Archives confirmed that no unattributed field map from the Powder River Basin region had been formally accessioned into Record Group 49 or any related collection in the 1910 to 1915 window.
The Wyoming SHPO said the coordinate range fell outside any known archaeological survey area. The Smithsonian said they had no record of a federally sponsored expedition to that region between 1995 and 1915 that would have produced a map of that type. None of them said the map was fake. None of them offered to examine it. None of them explained where it came from.
In 1991, Colter made contact with a cartographic historian named Dr. Ellen Marsh at the University of Colorado Boulder, who had published 2 papers on the development of field survey notation standards in the American West between 1870 and 1920. She agreed to examine the map in person. She traveled to Cody in April of that year and spent 2 days with it. Her conclusion, in a letter she wrote to Colter dated May 3, 1991, was precise. The paper was consistent with stock manufactured between 1895 and 1912. The ink composition, she had taken a small fiber sample for analysis, was iron gall, standard for field documentation of that period. The notation style, the contour interval markings, the triangulation symbology, all of it matched the conventions adopted by the Interior Department's survey divisions after 1889 and before the standardization revision of 1914. Someone trained in federal survey methodology had drawn this map, drawn it carefully, drawn it with the expectation that it would be filed and read by other trained professionals, and they had drawn a structure that no official record had ever acknowledged. Here is the part that the mainstream explanation cannot account for. The standard response to a map like this, the comfortable explanation, is that the structure was a natural rock formation misidentified by an inexperienced surveyor. Unusual geology in the Powder River Basin does exist. There are exposed sandstone formations in parts of Johnson and Sheridan counties that, under certain light conditions, could theoretically be described as geometric. That is the reasonable interpretation. That is what a careful person says first. But a surveyor trained to federal standards in 1900 did not misidentify sandstone as a 190-foot rectangular structure with internal divisions. That training specifically existed to prevent that error. The notation conventions Dr. Marsh identified, the same conventions this map used flawlessly everywhere else, included a distinct symbol set for natural rock outcroppings. That symbol set was not used here. The structure was drawn with architectural notation, deliberate, intentional. The person who drew it knew the difference, and they drew what they saw. Which means either they fabricated it and did so on an otherwise accurate, professionally executed map that they then sent to the federal government, or they documented something real.
And here is what sits underneath that question, like a stone. If they documented something real, why is there no expedition record, no survey commission number, no field team roster, no travel voucher, no supply requisition? Federal surveys of that scope in that period generated paperwork at every stage. The Interior Department in 1911 did not send men into the field without creating a paper trail. That paper trail would exist unless it was removed. In 2004, a researcher named Thomas Varick filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Bureau of Land Management seeking all internal correspondence related to unattributed maps submitted to the Interior Department's Cartographic Review Division between 1908 and 1916. He was a graduate student at the University of Wyoming at the time, working on a thesis about administrative gaps in federal land documentation. The BLM's response arrived 14 months later. It stated that records from the Cartographic Review Division for that specific window, 1908 to 1916, had been transferred to the Federal Records Center in Lenexa, Kansas in 1971 as part of a scheduled consolidation. The Lenexa Center confirmed receipt, but a subsequent fire in a storage annex at that facility in March of 1979 had destroyed an unspecified portion of the transferred materials. Thomas Varick never completed his thesis. He left the University of Wyoming's graduate program in the fall of 2005. His faculty advisor, when contacted years later by a journalist writing about federal land record gaps, said only that Varick had found the process discouraging. She did not elaborate. The fire at Lenexa in 1979 is documented. It is a real event in the federal records management history. What burned in that fire has never been fully inventoried. The BLM has stated that a complete damage assessment was never conducted because the affected materials were considered low-priority administrative overflow. Low priority. An unattributed map showing a structure that no survey ever acknowledged, filed in a division whose records burned in a federal warehouse 40 years ago. Every thread that leads toward an answer leads instead to a gap.
Raymond Colter died in March of 2003. His wife, Margaret Colter, donated his papers, his correspondence, his field notebooks, his copies of the letters he'd received from federal agencies and from Dr. Marsh to the Johnson County Library in Buffalo, Wyoming, where they remain in the local history collection under Accession number JCL 2003-047. The map itself was not included in the donation. Margaret Colter told the library archivist that she believed Raymond had loaned it to someone in the late 1990s and that it had never been returned. She did not remember the name of the person he had loaned it to. She said he had mentioned them only once as someone who had contacted him after reading a brief notice he had placed in the Wyoming Annals of History in 1996. That notice ran in the spring issue, 11 lines. Colter described the region in general terms: the region, the date range of its estimated origin, the anomalous structure, and asked whether any reader had knowledge of an unrecorded federal survey in northeastern Wyoming in the 1900-1914 period. He received, according to his correspondence files at the Johnson County Library, 4 responses. 3 of them were from amateur historians with no relevant knowledge. The 4th was from a man who identified himself only by the initials WH and a post office box in Sheridan, Wyoming. That letter is in the collection. It is 2 paragraphs long. The first paragraph says that Colter should stop asking questions in public forums. The second paragraph says that the structure on the map was not the only one. The envelope bears a Sheridan postmark dated June 14, 1996. The post office box number listed as the return address, Box 441 at the Sheridan, Maine Post Office, was closed and unassigned as of that same month, according to USPS administrative records obtained later. Whoever sent that letter had used a box that no longer existed or had closed it immediately after sending. Raymond Colter did not respond publicly after that. He continued his private correspondence with Dr. Marsh until her death in 2001. What they discussed in those final letters is not in the Johnson County collection. Dr. Marsh's personal papers were not donated to any archive. Her family declined comment when approached.
The structure on that map, whatever it was, wherever it came from, points towards something that has surfaced in fragments across the survey history of the American interior, not just in Wyoming. In 1923, a field geologist named Arthur Prenn submitted a supplemental report to the USGS following a routine mineral assessment survey in the Bighorn Basin. That supplemental report, referenced in his expedition's administrative index under Survey Commission 7741B, was never appended to the main survey file. The index references it. The file does not contain it. The USGS has no explanation for the discrepancy. In 1934, a civilian conservation corps crew working a drainage project in the same general region, northeast Wyoming, elevation above 5,000 feet, filed a site anomaly report with their district supervisor after encountering what their crew foreman described in writing as a series of cut stone arrangements inconsistent with natural formation. That report was forwarded to the Interior Department. It does not appear in the Interior Department's CCC administrative files for Wyoming District 9. The original, filed at the district level, burned in a 1947 fire at the Casper Field Office. 3 surveys, 3 gaps, 3 fires or disappearances, none of them connected in the official record, all of them pointing toward the same high-elevation terrain, all of them silent about what was actually found there. Every single instance follows the same pattern. Documentation begins, the anomaly is noted by a trained professional, the documentation disappears before it reaches the permanent record. That is not coincidence, that is a system. There is a plateau in northeastern Wyoming that sits at 5,340 feet above sea level, covered in dry grass and sagebrush, mapped by 3 separate federal surveys as empty, unremarkable terrain. Raymond Colter stood on it in the summer of 1988 and found nothing. He wrote in his field notebook, page 44, still readable in the Johnson County collection, that the ground in the area corresponding to the map's structure notation showed unusual compaction, harder than surrounding soil. He pressed a surveying rod into the earth at 6 points along what would have been the structure's outer boundary. At 4 of those 6 points, the rod met resistance at less than 8 inches of depth.
He did not dig. He was 61 years old, alone, and standing on land he did not own. He noted the resistance readings, photographed the area, and drove home. Those photographs are in the Johnson County collection. They show an unremarkable plateau, dry grass, sagebrush, the flat horizon of the Powder River Basin stretching in every direction. Nothing visible, nothing that would tell you from the surface that anything had ever been there. But something is under that ground, something that a trained federal surveyor documented in 1911, that a geologist referenced in 1923, that a CCC foreman described in 1934, and that a retired land surveyor felt through 8 inches of compacted earth in 1988. Something that no official record has ever named, acknowledged, or explained. The map that started all of this is gone again, somewhere between Raymond Colter's last years and the Johnson County Library donation. It left the public record for the 2nd time. The man who took it used initials and a dead post office box and told Colter that the structure was not the only one. He was right about that much. And if he was right about that, what else was on those other maps? What other structures in what other survey regions were documented once and then quietly, systematically, permanently buried? You are standing on top of a history that was never meant to surface. It almost didn't. The only reason any of this exists at all is because a retired surveyor in Cody, Wyoming bought a leather satchel at an estate sale and knew how to read what was inside it. The next file we found was not from Wyoming.